Let's talk about this thing of jihad. There are a lot of arguments that jihad is not armed struggle. It's not for all Muslims. Emir, start us off. What are all the arguments that are saying today that this is not armed struggle? This is just internal spiritual struggle.
Well, the first thing they say is, well, listen, Islam means peace. And if you look at the word Islam, it does not mean peace. It means submission to Allah, and it's a totally different scenario then. But after September 11th, they had to create this chasm between what they wanted to consider extremists and who they were as Western Muslims. And so they allegorized the Quran. They said the Quran only spoke of an internal struggle. The Sufis are very good at doing this. Or they said this is an historical argument, that is Muhammad himself was a military leader but never called anyone else to military leadership. Finally, they would say, well, yes, but only in self-defense. Only if we are attacked do we have jihad. And so they try to compare it between any of the self-defense arguments within Christendom or secular ideas.
Ergun, you believe now that even though that's what people are trying to promote, that is not the case, and we're actually going to look at the Quran, we're going to look at the Hadith, and show that you can't misinterpret that any other way than saying this is physical warfare.
And this is something that we're only dealing with here in America or in the West, because around the world this is without question. Around the world the Muslims would listen to these arguments and just scoff, and they do scoff, and they mock, because they say this is ridiculous, this is an embarrassment to Islam that you would possibly think this. If the numbers hold up right, and 16% of the Muslims worldwide believe that the bombing of the World Trade Towers was morally justifiable. If those numbers continue out, we're talking about somewhere in the vicinity of 100 million Muslims who believe that jihadic acts are morally justified. And so you see that there's this divergence of opinion about jihad, but what we hear here in America, we have never heard anywhere else in the world. We've never heard, certainly in our background, that you would say jihad was only an internal struggle. The Quran is explicit, but the Hadith is even more explicit, that there is such a thing as jihad al-asghar, there is such a thing as high jihad, there is such a thing as acts of holiness, but there is also such a thing as acts of warfare in the name of Allah.
Yeah, and I think we need to make clear to the people, we're not trying to promote this. We're just trying to say what the historical situation is so we will be able to know how to deal with it. Also, it's an opportunity for Muslims to rethink things. And we want to show the folks the quandary of Muslims in the West who are dealing with these very issues that we're going to talk about. But let's get down to the Quran and the Hadith. Let's slow it down for the people. Why are certain verses, why do they trap you into one way of looking at jihad?
Well, one of the arguments that we have against us as the Christian community is they'll say, yes, but in your Old Testament you had kill the Amalekites, destroy them, every living creature. And we say, yes, this is true. This is exactly what the Old Testament taught. But in that scripture, as you read it, that is descriptive. Prescriptive means that it applies for today. And there's nothing in Scripture that says, go ye and do likewise. The problem that they have in Islam is everything is prescriptive. They do not have simply descriptive texts. That which was done in days gone by is still to be done now. This is why in their culture they lived the same way they did as when Muhammad was alive in the 7th century. And so you do not have a distinction of hermeneutics here where they can say, but this was past, we don't do this anymore, that's a description, but we are not called to do this anymore. Around the world, the Muslims know jihad was then, jihad is now.
Let's start with the contemporary illustration that actually quotes the Quran and work from that angle, okay? In 1998, you had a fatwa that was signed by 5 Islamic leaders, Osama bin Laden being one of them. Could you just read us some excerpts of this letter that's been...
Sure. It's the famous fatwa signed February the 23rd, 1998. Fazlur Rahman, Osama bin Mohammed bin Laden, others signed it. I will read just their conclusion. After listing what they believe to be perceived dangers of the Crusader-Zionist alliance, they say this, on that basis, talking about what we have done against them. In compliance with Allah's orders, we issue the following fatwa to all Muslims. The ruling to kill the Americans and their allies, civilian and military, is an individual duty, fardain in Arabic, for every Muslim who can do it in any country in which it is possible in order to liberate the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Holy Mosque, from their grip, in order for their armies to be moved out of the lands of Islam, defeated and unable to threaten any Muslim. This is in accordance with the words of Almighty Allah, and fight the pagans altogether as they fight you altogether. And so they not only here, but throughout the entire fatwa, which is many pages, they quote the Quran, they quote the Hadith, and they believe that by so doing, they have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that this is an act not of geopolitical consequence, not of conquest, but of Islamic duty.